There's a beautiful day headed your way. Keep your head up, you'll be okay. A beautiful day waiting for you. Just open your eyes, you'll see it's true.
Welcome everyone to Science You Had Me at Hello. My name is Melissa Rancourt, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's episode. And the title of today's episode is something that's been inspired by the three speakers I'm about to introduce you to. And the word that comes to mind is ingenuity. So you'll get a chance in a second to hear their stories and how I think that there's such a great opportunity to listen to their originality, inventiveness, and how they've gone from different elements of their career and how they are passionate about the subjects that they are able to study in and that they're able to have a career in. This broadcast series is designed to help inspire the next generation in science. How do we do that? By asking awe-inspiring individuals to share their stories. This broadcast is brought to you by Greenlight for Girls. We're an international organization that works around the world to create hands-on STEM learning for everyone, with particular focus to girls of all ages and backgrounds. So today, in our virtual studio, we welcome you all from around the world, and we're really going to get a sense from around the world in just a moment when I tell you more about who's here. And today is all about you, those who are joining us, our role models that I'll get a chance to introduce in a moment, and those listening in after our show. But now, we've invited to the stage three amazing speakers, and in a moment, we're going to ask them to share the spark that inspired them in their STEM journey, and we'll learn more about who they are and what they do. So here's a moment now for all of you to start taking note, getting ready to ask questions, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. So first, I would love to introduce Nancy Vermeulen from Antwerp, Belgium. Nancy has always been fascinated by space. She studied astrophysics and became an airline pilot and instructor. She took part in the ESA astronaut selections, led a Mars simulation expedition, and later founded her own space training academy. There, she prepares the first space tourists for their journey and people who also want to experience it. As a true space ambassador, she aims to bring the universe closer to the people through lectures, team building exercises, and space training courses. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being here. All right, I'd like to also bring in our second speaker, Paige Kassalen. Paige is coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so she's coming in from the US. After graduating with a degree in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech, Paige began her career with Covestro, so one of our global partners, in 2015, and soon became the only female engineer working with Solar Impulse 2, the world's first solar-powered airplane to circumnavigate the globe, as it completed the round the world mission in Abu Dhabi in July 2016. And after Solar Impulse, she helped Covestro develop its strategy for materials for the future of mobility and shared her work at conferences around the US. Recently, she's just achieved a Master's of Information Systems Management degree from Carnegie Mellon. And this fall, she's applying her degree with a role focused on business cases to implement innovative technologies in the finance industry. Thank you so much, Paige, for being here. And our next speaker and our last speaker for today, Rudayna Abdo. She's calling in from The Hague. Rudayna is an expert at envisioning, managing, and tailoring solutions to challenging housing, land use, and urban transportation across the diverse urban geographies, including the Arabian Gulf. Her passion lies in empowering people and striving for social equity. She has a bachelor's degree from architectural studies from MIT, a master's degree in urban planning, and a graduate of Amsterdam's Think School of Creative Leadership. Rudayna recently founded Thaki. It's an NGO that is dedicated to empowering refugees and disadvantaged children to learn and thrive through self-paced and motivational electronic tools. Thank you all so much for being here. So this phrase, "Science, you had me at hello," you might actually recognize this perhaps from a famous quote from a movie. The idea behind it is to share the moments that motivate us, that motivate us to be part of something bigger, to create, to come up with solutions for people or for situations that need us. And the word science means everything, from the subject itself to the connection to STEM, but also to the idea of discovery, curiosity, and possibilities. So now let's hear from our special speakers today to ask them about their spark of inspiration. And then we're going to take it to the next stage and hear from them directly when we get a chance to meet them in our rooms. But first, before we do, I'm going to ask you guys, so thank you again for being here. I'm going to ask you to tell me about a moment in your life, whether it's way back, or maybe it was yesterday. And that is something that inspired you, was that spark of like, oh yes, this is the direction I'm going, or the direction I'm in, or a new direction to follow. I'm going to turn to Nancy first. And then also, I know that today's also, I'll just mention this too, today's an exciting day in the news, right? Because you're talking to a lot of news people about what's going on. So tell us a bit about that, and also what sparked you along the way.
Tonight, SpaceX Crew Dragon is going to launch, and it's the first time since 2011 that Americans will launch a rocket from American grounds. And very special in this one is that the company SpaceX is the provider of the spacecraft and the launch rocket. So private industry is coming in very fast. And space will become more accessible to many more people.
This is incredible. And so you've been on the phone and on talking to journalists and
local television tonight. Yeah,
that's local television. This is fantastic. Yes. All right, now tell us. So, because I imagine that space might be also behind the story of what inspired you to go forward, or perhaps not. What is that moment of inspiration that struck you, that got you started?
You will never believe it, but my spark of inspiration came when I was 6 years old, and I was looking at Maya the bee. And Maya had a lot of friends, just like today. She's still very popular. And at that time, she had a friend who was named Professor Alexander. It was a mouse. And Professor Alexander, he made a telescope. And for him, it was very simple. He just took a magnifying glass, cardboard tube, another magnifying glass. He taped everything together, and he looked up at the stars, and he could see even more stars than I could see with the naked eye. And that was my moment of inspiration. So I wanted a telescope as well. So I sneaked into my parents' office. I got their glasses. And also took a lot of tape, cardboard tube, and my own little lenses. I taped everything together, and I made myself a telescope. I looked up at the stars and everything around me, and I couldn't see anything. So it wasn't that easy to make a telescope. But from that moment on, the inspiration was there and never left me. And then, a year later, for my 7th birthday, I received a small telescope. And together with my father, I started watching to the stars. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I love how that story started from when you were very little, so that thinking back of like what set kind of a chain reaction of ideas that set you in motion to where you are today, which is brilliant. I'm going to throw out one question to you already, because there's a lot of fun dialogue going on, and the team is sending me some questions to ask. So Nancy, before I go on to the next, before I go on to you, Paige, actually, I'm going to ask Nancy a question. So the question is, with space becoming more accessible to more people, do you predict that regular people, like us, would be shooting up into space soon? What do you think?
Absolutely. So the space industry is just taking off right now. Just like after World War II, only a very few rich people could take an airplane. Today, traveling by plane is regular, and a whole socio-economic evolution came after World War II. The same is happening in space right now. So you have, of course, unmanned space flight. So a lot of industries technological development is going place. But besides that, you have a whole new industry, the space tourism industry, which is starting right now. You know about Virgin Galactic, who is going to launch, hopefully next year, the first space tourists, who will just jump at the corner, at the top of the atmosphere, and then glide back very shortly. But for example, SpaceX wants to launch space tourists in Earth orbit, so in orbits around the Earth, starting from 2021. And on top of that, the International Space Station will be opened to private astronauts, tourists, but also employees of pharmaceutical companies or high technological companies who are making isolation materials to start testing and producing new materials. So maybe some girls in the future, some people in the future who are non-professional astronauts will go up into space to do a regular scientific job.
Oh, how fantastic. Oh, thank you for that. We're going to come back to this because I know there's a lot more questions here. Paige, I'd love to find out from you, especially, you know, you are going in a different direction now, or like a continuation in a different way. And you and I met when you were part of the Solar Plane project. But what was that moment of inspiration? When did that hit you, and what was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to share a moment that was a little bit more recent, but to get there, I want to talk about how growing up, I always loved to be creative and put my creativity to use, problem solving. So I attended a lot of engineering camps during my high school years and events at my local science center, so very similar to what you all are doing today. And I knew engineering would help me build up my toolbox of knowledge to solve bigger and more exciting problems. But when I received my degree, I had absolutely no idea that I'd be able to apply my skills to so many cool projects. But so to talk about my moment of inspiration, so shortly after finishing my degree, I was at a conference and I saw a woman with a solar panel on her bag. So I assumed that solar panel probably collected energy to charge something. So I went over to her and asked, "Did you make this bag yourself?" She shared with me where she got her electronics. I went home and then I ordered everything I needed to make my own solar panel phone charging purse. So I have my purse here with me today. This is my purse, and you can see the solar panel on the front, and then my electronics are on the inside here. And I can connect my phone, point it at the sun, and then I can charge up my cell phone. So I posted a photo of this on my social media, me with my purse, and people started asking, where could I buy one of these? And this was a moment where a moment of inspiration that sparked my love for science, because it taught me that I have this mentality for how can I make this versus how can I buy this? And I feel like a lot of engineers or people that are in love with science have this feeling of creativity and what can I do with these skills that I have? So creating this purse honestly didn't seem like the craziest thing to me because my love for science is really intertwined into my DNA. But I started noticing more and more about this different mentality that I have. And when I was applying to be a part of Solar Impulse, I talked about the process of building this purse and that mentality of, I want to make something. I want to be a part of something that's completely new. And I was selected. So moments like this one make me excited for the future and to see what role I'll play in building it, because honestly, we all have a role. Me, the other speakers, all of you on the call today, we all have a role in inventing that future.
I love it. I love also how that one, what seemingly was a small thing that you did, that you went home and just created, ended up being part of a story that actually ended up getting a job, you know, in some respect, you know, along with everything else that you're doing. But it was a wonderful thing to bring forward, which is amazing. I know that when we're in the breakout room, you're going to share a picture of the solar plane. And when you were sharing with me earlier, it reminded me that we actually had a solar plane at one of our G4G events some years ago. But it was like I don't even know what the scale of it was, maybe a 10th of the size of the actual one. That said, it was absolutely huge. And I remember that when I asked the school we were having the event in, which was in Brussels, and I said, "Do you mind if I bring a solar plane?" They said, "Sure," but they didn't ask any other questions. So I just said, they said yes, so let's just do it. And it ended up taking up like the entire lobby of the school, and off to a side like this. So like the wingspan was like this. So all the teachers had to dive underneath it in order to get to their classrooms, which was great. So it's immediately what I thought of when I saw that, which is good. All right, perfect. All right, I'm going to pass this on because I'd love to hear from Rudayna. Now, you and I, when we met for Greece, I think it was for the Greece event, you were actually calling in from Abu Dhabi at that time, and now you're in the Netherlands. So I want to hear more about the journeys that you've taken, but then also how it might relate to what was that moment of inspiration and spark for you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And really inspiring hearing about Nancy and Paige. I think mine is not your typical core science journey, but I loved biology. Biology was my favorite subject, and I had an incredible teacher from 6th grade all the way to 13th. I did my A-levels, and I was absolutely passionate about it. And there was a moment, I was reflecting upon this inspiring, my aha moment. It's a very strange one, but we went to the zoo, the Athens Zoo, which was in terrible shape, very, very sad shape. And the well-being of the animals hurt me so bad. It struck so deep, and I started all of these initiatives of fundraising or what have you, and that started my desire to do maybe veterinary surgery, medicine, something along those lines, which I never did, by the way. But I was incredibly torn because I loved maths. I also was a math geek, and I loved problem solving and doing that kind of for a hobby, as well as drawing. I love to draw. So it was, the career choice was, do I go, it was genetics, medicine, architecture. So it was almost a toss of a coin. And I ended up going to an engineering school. I went to MIT with both options open. But ultimately, we talked about STEM. And it's the STEAM, putting the A in there, to me, that was the draw, bringing the art into the sciences that captured me. So that's what I did. And but going back to that story of the well-being of the animals and just general well-being and being more on the social impact end of things, this is when 5 years ago, after a long career in architecture and urban planning, which is what I've been doing in many continents, I decided I had to do something about the refugee crisis and children not going. I mean, we're talking about millions of children. You're right, I was living in Abu Dhabi at the time, so very close to the Middle Eastern refugee crisis. And that's when I just plunged and started the initiative that I'm working on now, which is EdTech and education for children who are totally missing out. So that's a bit of a long-winded story, but it's taking it back to the social impact and the needing to do something about the well-being of creatures and of humanity that drew me to say, okay, I'm enough of urban planning, I've got to do something more directly impactful.
Well, it's amazing. I think that's what connects the three of you together, is also the ingenuity aspect, right? And like you were talking about, Rudayna, is like all of the things that come up during our life, like for decision points, and especially in those early ones of I like this and I like this, and which direction do you go in? It reminds me, actually, and I had this right in front of me. So I have this book here, I Can Be Anything. It was given to me when I was I think it was 14 or 15. And from my godmother, who's a lawyer. And so she had given this to me, and I was diving into it and going through, and I'm like, oh, I want to be this, and I want to be this, and I want to be this. There's so many different possibilities. And these possibilities, just as you mentioned, Rudayna, then also they come up later in life as well. You can go into different directions. And actually, I was having fun because I was looking through at what I had marked down at the age of 14 and 15. And I marked down astronomy. So it reminds me of what you were saying, Nancy. I also looked at architect, so Rudayna. And then I had dancer, because I was a dancer, and engineer, which is what I ended up being. But I also had FBI. I think I wanted a secret desire to be a spy. I also had musician from my father, lawyer from my godmother, and pharmacist for my mother. So there's so many different avenues we can go into. And it's all about following different paths to see what happens, and also to continue following because they go into so many directions. I have a couple of questions, and then we're going to go to breakout rooms because I know that there are some questions that are popping up that they're going to want to ask you specifically. So I'm going to go up and just take a couple questions here that the team has given to me. All right, so one is for Paige. Do you think the technology used in the solar impulse could one day power the commercial flights too? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that will be, it will be interesting to see. And I'm excited to, especially since it was so early on in my career, I'm excited to see how the next 10, 20, 30 years look with the aviation industry. But one of the big things with Solar Impulse was that it wasn't only about revolutionizing the aviation industry. It was also about revolutionizing what we can do with alternative energy. So a lot of people said, no, it is impossible. You cannot fly day and night around the sun, or day and night around the world only using the power of the sun. But the team made it possible. So I think, you know, having those moments where you're shattering those boundaries for what is possible is one of the coolest things about being in the engineering or science space. Yeah, we're totally innovating every day and creating something new.
Absolutely. I always say too, I'm also an entrepreneur, and the one word that will motivate me no matter what's going on is the word no. So, you know, the idea of someone saying, oh, it's not possible to have a flight go across and not have any power or so forth, gets you thinking of like, well, okay, but what if we did this, and what if we did this? That, again, back to the ingenuity. So coming up with different creative ideas to get to the direction that we're trying to. And I imagine actually with Rudayna, the work that you're doing with Thaki, with the NGO, it's anything you're starting, of course, is very challenging. So I imagine you run into more barriers than than avenues that are open. So I don't know if there's something that has sparked you along the way to say, no, we're going to keep on going, especially seeing the work that you're doing.
Definitely, and actually the snow is also what is I take it on as a challenge of come on, bring it on, even on the tech side of how we're doing things with the developers. Because I'm not a developer myself, but with the developer team, when they say no, it's not possible, it's like I keep on pushing until we come up with a solution. There's always going to be a challenge, and that challenge actually ends up also leading to an improvement, whether we foreseen or not. So it's all of this iterative process. Hey, I didn't know anything about ed tech and programming and education refugees. I stepped into it late, after 25 years as an urban planner, building cities and building transportation networks. And this, I don't know what's next. I'm sure there'll be another career after this, but I'm very impassioned about this one right now.
And that's what's so much fun, isn't it? It's learning something new. So even that no sometimes is, well, oh, I don't know about that. Well, let me learn about that. And then who knows what that might lead to. So it's all about being open as well as, taking that information in and seeing where you're going with it. Okay, so I know there's a lot of questions out there. They want to learn from you. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into breakout rooms where each of our speakers, so Nancy, they want to know all about your work, especially with what's going on right now. Paige, so get across your story, especially I know you've got pictures of the solar plane to share. Rudayna, so definitely tell us more about the work that you're doing right now. What the group is going to do is they're going to come to you, and what we're all going to do right now is we're actually going to travel. Now I know it seems like travel is not very possible right now unless you're going to space, because this is what's happening today, right? So but what we're going to do is we're going to travel now. So for all of you who are listening in, all of our participants, get ready to travel.
So yeah, hello everyone. Like you said, my moment of inspiration came very young, and it continued through my life. During the time I was at school, my environment was not so encouraging me because I was a girl, and I grew up in a conservative background where you had to be nice, and the way to success was to find and marry a successful husband and to be the driving force behind him. So I had to really fight my way through this perception. But luckily, and it happens in life, that at the right moment you meet the right people. And at the age of 17, I was a member of a public observatory. And being a member of a public observatory, Rudayna in Hoven, where I met amazing youngsters, really helped me through my teenager years to keep on my dream. And at the age of 17, I met this person. I don't know if you can see him, but it's our first Belgian astronaut, Dirk Vriemhout. And I asked Dirk Vriemhout, hey, I want to be an astronaut as well. What do I have to do to become an astronaut? So he told me, yeah, it's important to have a scientific background, but also operational experience, such as pilot training. And yeah, at the age of 17, I had a double life. I had my conservative environment at school, the society. At the other hand, inspiring persons. So to make a long story short, I continued to follow what Dirk Vriemhout had told me. So I studied astrophysics at the University of Antwerp. And just like Melissa told you already, never let anybody say that you cannot do something. I remember my math teachers saying at school, Nancy, you're not good enough. You cannot study astrophysics because you're not smart enough. But I will tell you something. I was just not interested in school. And that was the reason I was absent at school. And being absent in their perception was a little bit like, you cannot do it, but I could do it. So even if your environment now tells you you're not good enough, you cannot do it, if you're motivated and if you believe in yourself and you find the right people, and you will find them today, all of you have internet, then everything is possible. So after my studies in astrophysics, I started a PhD, and just for a year, because then I became an airline pilot. I became an airline pilot at Sabina, the Belgian flag carrier at the time. But yeah, it went bankrupt after a year. So I was flying then for DHL. DHL is a large cargo company. In the beginning, people were making fun of that, like, oh my God, are you going to fly cargo? Flying passengers is cool, but not flying cargo. So anyway, flying cargo allowed me to fly large airplanes. I started flying the Boeing 727. And later on, I moved to the Airbus 300, flying not only in Europe, but also the Middle East and Africa. And this really opened my mind by flying around the world and by meeting other people and other cultures. Especially one experience was very important for me. It was flying at Baghdad in 2003. The American Army was looking for volunteers to fly military missions in Baghdad. And I volunteered to fly military missions during the Gulf War from Baghdad to Bahrain. And the maneuvers were very challenging. But of course, my dream was to become an astronaut. And I applied at ESA. I participated in the ESA selection in 2008. And I had to wait a long time before they hired me. Because, becoming a professional astronaut is difficult. Well, in 1992, there were selections for astronauts, and I had to wait until 2008, that's 16 years, before there were astronaut selections. So there were 6 available places for the European Astronaut Corps, and we were with initially 15,000 candidates, of which 8,000 were highly qualified. I made it approximately to the last 400. But then, of course, Frank de Winne, he also told me, Nancy, there will be no Belgians in here. because there is still a Belgian astronaut active. So yeah, I realized that maybe winning the lottery is easier than becoming a professional astronaut. And after that realization in 2008, I initially felt really depressed. Let's say that I was in a black hole, but
Nancy, you have 1 minute left till we travel again to the main room.
That insight gave me my energy to start my own space training academy. Today, I'm training private astronauts for their first space travel. I do so by organizing zero gravity flights.
Wow.
And by using special simulators. Yeah. And that's the closest possible simulation that we get to a real space flight.
Okay, all right, so everyone's traveled back. How did it go for the three of you as far as in your rooms? Yeah? Great, good. We have time for just a quick question in between, because then we're going to travel again. And we're already hearing back from some questions and so forth. So before we dive into our next room, I have actually an overall question that came up. And I think I'll just keep it open and just see which one of you something might come to mind. We all go through different things where we're talking about what inspires us, right? But there are moments where sometimes the opposite happens. So something along the way where you kind of question yourself and you're like, am I doing the right thing? And does something come to mind where that happened? And if so, what did you do about it? So I open it up to the three of you guys to kind of dive in, unmute your mic if you want to go for it, and just say what comes to mind.
Yeah, I could share something that my group and I talked about. One of the things I had to do when working with the solar-powered airplane was catching this wing as it landed, which seems absolutely ridiculous. And I talked a little bit about just the first time hearing it, wondering if I was up to the job. And the advice I gave was, a lot of times in your career, especially if you're taking risks, you're going to be afraid of certain things, or you're going to have that fear and the self-doubt. But the fear will always be outweighed by that inspiration. So working with a solar-powered airplane was the coolest job I could potentially ever have, and I wasn't going to let my fear slow me down from any of the tasks.
Great, thank you for that. That's brilliant. All right, good. Nancy, Rudayna, anything that comes up?
Well, if you have a passion, go for it. Even if your environment is not encouraging you, you have to find yourself an environment where you can develop your talents. For me, it was a public observatory, because I told already at school I was not really encouraged. But the sky is never your limit. You will find the right people, and as long as you believe in that, the right people will cross your way. And
that's a great thing. And you alluded to as well is that sometimes, especially when you're going through your schooling, is that can be actually, the opposite of motivating, even though that's what it's there for, but it doesn't always come out that way. But to keep persevering. Fantastic. Rudayna.
Actually, very complimentary to what you were just saying, Nancy, and acting on your passion and acting on your emotion as well, listening to the heart energy. I was talking about how listening to the news was just gutting me, war and all of the destruction that brings. And I needed to be doing something in a white space that brings hope, and not just be overwhelmed by all that heaviness. So I stepped out and stepped away from my profession to do something about that. I had to. It was a calling.
Yeah. I completely connect to that. It's actually how G4G was born as well. So completely know what you mean. Great. I think we're ready to dive into our next room. And there are going to be questions waiting for you there, questions waiting for you here. You'll have a different set of people with you this time. Again, feel free to open up to invite people should they want to share their video so you can see who you're talking to, see what questions emerge. And I know they want to hear about a day in the life of you and what you do. So with that, I think everyone should take a deep breath and get ready to jump into the travel again. And in a moment, you're going to have something come on your screen which says what breakout room you're going into. As soon as you see it, go ahead and go.
Hello, everyone. We only have 6 minutes, so I'm just going to plunge right into it. And please do turn on your videos. At least I can see the faces and see some animation behind all of you. And even feel free to turn on your mic so that and jump in. So this is interactive. We were cut short last time because it was, yeah, we'll go a bit faster this time. But as you heard me just say now, I left I don't know if I left, but I've stepped away from my 25-year career as an urban planner, building cities, doing some pretty interesting stuff, transportation networks, affordable housing in different geographies in North America and the Middle East. But it was related to what I just said. I just couldn't. I was choked by listening to the news and hearing what was going on. And this was particularly to the Syrian refugee crisis, although I feel similarly now hearing what's going on in Yemen, and it's just so many parts of the world. And I have been involved in philanthropy always, even since I was a kid, actually, with Christmas cards, drawing Christmas cards for a charity that I've always supported. But it felt I had to do more. I had to give my full self and not just a bit of my paycheck and after hours self, but my full day and night self to something. I didn't know what that one thing was, but I did have a moment. There was, for Dheki, my nonprofit, there was a moment of birth. It was, sperm hitting egg moment. I remember it very, very vividly. It was, I'm a runner and I was injured. So I was doing my stationary exercise bike and watching a TED talk like I was doing a lot of back then. And it was with Melissa Fleming from the UNHCR, speaking about a Syrian boy who left Syria, and the only thing he took with him was his high school certificate, because that was what he valued. And I had grown up with the mantra of education is the only thing you can take with you. My parents were Palestinian, so they were refugees when they were children. We had to flee Lebanon when I was a child. In fact, our house was bombed when we were in it. And so we dramatically left during the Civil War. So this mantra of education being so critical is something that really has been very strong for me growing up. And so I was thinking, I've got 2 boys who are teenagers now, but thinking, how many devices do we have in our household? And I hate waste of any kind. The kids know that anything that's left over is going to end up in some kind of a smoothie that they're going to have to consume, because I just wasn't going to, it's something I can't tolerate. And even on the sustainability end of things, food waste, environmental waste, just wasting of time. So I thought, well, how many devices do we have in our household that are still perfectly good? So why don't I do something about that? And there is education, a whole generation of children that's missing out on their education. And that's how it started. So I started by pitching my kids' school, actually. I went to the principal and asked her, how we have your old laptops. I was extremely nervous, not knowing how the reception was going to be. But she invited the IT director to the meeting. And he said, well, actually, I love what you're doing. Can I join your team? I said, yes, please, can you join my team? Because I know what I want to do, but I have no idea how to get there, because I'm not in technology. I'm not a programmer myself, which is, a shortcoming. Everybody should know a little bit of programming. And I've learned along the way, actually, in these 5 years that I started Dheki. I would pop in. We live in another country now, but for the first year, I would drop the kids off, pop into his office, and I think I got a mini computer science degree with 20-minute increments every morning. And that's how it all started. A lot of people started rallying behind the cause, people who had the logistics. There are so many aspects to it. It's a full-fledged business. We get the laptops, we image them. So we have 70 gigs of content that's on the laptops, that's interactive, that's gamified, nothing static. And, from National Geographic and Oxford University Press and some great content that's on there. And then we get the laptops to organizations that work with the kids. And then there's an end-of-life e-waste partner as well. But just putting the devices out there isn't enough. I quickly learned, because the recipients, the teachers who are working with the children may not have any digital skills, digital literacy. So this is what we're there to do. And actually, for me, you'll see this on our website, education is a human right, but digital literacy today is a human right as well. Because if the kids don't have these basics that we all take for granted, then they can't even get to the front door. And with automation and AI, all the manual labor jobs are going to be so scarce in any case. So it's absolutely critical. And for us as well, for me, it's just as important to learn how to learn as much as it is what to learn. So this is what my goal is, to have inquisitive learners, children who are coming, many of them actually have never been there. They could be teenagers who've never been to school, because they've been there's been a school gap for 5 years, and they were, so it's a very dire situation of the kids that we're working with. And then it's amazing how technology and learning with computers changes them. Actually, it's motivating and everything and what have you. And I'm just noticing we've got 28 seconds, but there's a couple of questions like, how is mixing your background plus kids? How do you do the teaching? There's a lot that we've got a teacher training toolkit and resources, and we keep in close contact with the schools, with the organizations that receive laptops from us. So we don't just leave them and go. We keep that very strong connection, and this is our learning as well. And we've got 1 more minute. Has national politics come as a challenge with my work as refugees? Actually, I've particularly partner with organizations. We don't go to so far we haven't gone to the governmental entities. They're taken care of. So politics, it's all politics. Everything's very political because of the milieu, because of the situation with refugees. But we keep well away from that, and we focus on the psychosocial learning aspects, on well-being, on tolerance, on anti-bullying, gender equality. These are financial literacy. My kids don't even learn financial literacy at school. I never studied financial literacy, but these are the things that we want to bring forward to the kids, and just be non-governmental, non-sectarian, non-everything, but inclusive.
Great. So it looks like everyone's starting to come back, traveling back out of our breakout room. So I want to ask the three of you, what was one of the questions that you received that you just absolutely comes to mind that would be great to share with everyone here? Is there any question that you just received?
It's not related to science, but it's really, I need to change my background, sorry. It's related to circumstance. And the question was related to politics. How does politics get in the way or influence what you're doing? And since I'm working in conflict areas or places where you've got dealing with refugees, and politics are very much at the forefront, I think it's an important question, because it's also related to navigating situations that are outside of the things that you really want to get, that you want to accomplish, and you have to deal with these things in any work settings in science and in any scenario. So that was the one specific question, but I think it just triggers things that you have to deal with that are outside of the realm of really the work that you want to get to and accomplish.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Thanks. Nancy, what's one of the questions that you just received?
Yeah, somebody asked me, with the moment you didn't become a professional astronaut, how did it come up to find your path in a different way? Well, it happens a lot of times. You can make plans when you're young and steps towards it, but circumstances can just change the path. Mm-hmm. When I was a young girl, I was projecting the future. I thought, when I'm a grown-up, it will be normal to fly to space and take a space plane like we take an airplane. But when I was a grown-up, space was not there for everyone. It's even not now. And the realization is that if there is no opportunity, you can help creating opportunities. It's very important. And I'm going back to my grandparents after World War II. They had to rebuild a whole society out of nothing. So, we don't have to take things for granted. If it's not there, if you have a passion, you can help pave the way towards it.
Right, which is great advice, especially right now. Thank you for that.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And Paige, what question did you get?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got a question about being the only female engineer on the ground crew and if there were any challenges. And I told a story about one time, and one of the roles that I had on the airplane was I had to pull it out onto the runway. And this airplane weighed as much as the car. It was about 5,800 pounds. And so I remember one day I was taking pictures with like pulling this airplane. And after we were done with the photos, one of the guys said, "Here, Paige, I can pull it back into the hangar if you would like." And I said, "No, if I'm going to take pictures doing this, I'm pulling this airplane back in too. It was one of my jobs." So my message was, don't be afraid to use your voice and speak up and show people what you can do, because like the people were just trying to be nice, but I'm strong. I could do this too. So use your voice.
That's great. I love that advice, and I know that some of the people in the room with you said the same thing, because it's already coming out in the chat as well. Some good overall questions are arising. I think we're going to be moving on to our experiment right now. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask the participants, first of all, what are you drawing right in front of you? Keep on going with that, because after the experiment, at the very, very end, I'm going to ask you to share it for those that want to. So you can turn on your screen and share your drawing. And this is, what has inspired you? Maybe an idea has appeared. Maybe it's words that came out listening to this story. And you never know what might connect to you that actually gives you this idea of what you can go towards to next. And it doesn't have to be at a certain age. This happens to us at all ages. And what I would like to ask all of you as our speakers and role models is, while we're listening to the experiment, what I would love to do when we come back is also ask what your advice would be. There's a couple questions that have come up, which is, what is that, when you have so many areas of STEM, for example, that you love, how do you choose one? And what would be your advice to go into the fields that you're in right now? So especially I think that's came up too in working with refugees, Rudayna, so your name came up as well. So, but it came up with all of you. So how would you, what's your advice to get into your career, your path, where you are now? But then also, how do you choose the one thing? So let that settle a little bit. I'm going to come back to you with that. I'm going to turn this over to the G4G team, because as part of everything we do at G4G, it's also about hands-on. So they have an experiment to share. Perhaps it'll inspire you of something you can do. We tend to do things that you can find in your kitchen. So let's see if that came out here.
Hello and welcome to the Greenlight for Girls Atelier office with your G4G team, Alex and Indra. So on today's broadcast, we heard from some amazing speakers who are using ingenious ways to transform their work. But even if you're not going to create the next electronic tool or join in on a Mars simulation, you can still look around you at all the different ways you can make a difference. And one way that you could start is by looking at something that's everywhere around you: plastic.
Exactly. So we all know the big role that plastic plays in helping us solve big challenges and reaching big goals, like protecting the environment and thinking sustainable. So today we are going to show you how, if we add a little bit of that science magic into the equation, we can find new solutions and make a big difference. So what is the challenge? The challenge is, how can we think about plastics in new ways? How can we reinvent plastics to actually be something that serves both us and the planet? And how are we going to do that? Well, we are simply going to look at plastics in a new way by actually getting hands-on, being inspired, and creating our very own homemade plant-based bioplastic. As in any good experiment, we first have to get ourselves started by setting our materials. What actually a lot of people don't know is that plastic can not only be made from petroleum, which is a finite resource, but actually from all plant-based materials. So these are our magic ingredients that we have with us today to make bioplastic. 1, cornstarch, water, vinegar, secret ingredient, glycerin or glycerol, and for the wow effect, some food coloring.
So now that we've seen all the materials needed to make this super cool homemade plastic, it gets me thinking to what we can actually use from it. And for example, I love so many things that are made out of plastic, and in particular I'm thinking about my phone cover, because without it, it would be completely smashed, my poor cell phone. But my question to you is, what would be beneficial to you to have in your daily life that's made out of bioplastic? Now, let's get started to see how we can actually do this.
All right, let's make bioplastic. We know all our ingredients, and we're gonna start mixing them. So we're gonna start out by 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. What does the cornstarch do? It is actually a natural polymer, which means that instead of petroleum, we are using cornstarch as a natural polymer, which is a long, long chain of molecules. Next up, water. What does water do? 8 tablespoons. It is our solvent. And actually, it is also what keeps the molecules nice and excited when we later on put all our ingredients onto the stove and heat them up. 8 tablespoons of water. Okay. And then we have our vinegar. 2 teaspoons of vinegar. Why are we adding vinegar? Well, it is actually what is going to break down the starch molecules. And last but not least, we're adding our secret magic ingredient of glycerin or glycerol, which is what will keep our plant-based plastic nice and flexible. All right. Ready to start mixing it up. We have to make sure that all of the ingredients we put in our pot are nice and mixed and smooth. Okay, starting. There we go. Okay, we're ready to heat up the mix and get our molecules excited. We're going to start on not so high heat, maybe like 3 or 4. And we have to make sure that we keep mixing continuously and slowly, because what we're going to see is that we're going to turn this mix into a gel-like consistence. So this is where we need a little bit of patience. So now that we've been mixing nice and continuously, we can see that our plant-based plastic is starting to turn into a gel-like consistency. Can you see that? So, as we love being colorful and always like to have a wow effect in everything we do, we're going to add 2, 3, 4, just some food coloring. And turning into a beautiful, colorful gel. And now we're just going to keep mixing until we've achieved a transparent texture.
So while the solution is thickening, we have one last question for you. Now, of course, we're being inspired by the companies that are reinventing with plastic and all the innovation behind it. For example, there are many products like cutlery, plastic bags, gift cards, and so many others that are now using this type of biodegradable plastic. So the question for you is, how would your world change? How would the world of those in your community change if there are more products being made with this type of plastic? Tell us in the chat now. We look forward to hearing your answer.
Okay, so we have been observing how we have been creating an amazing gel-like consistency. I think our bioplastic is ready to be poured. So, next step, pour out your mixture onto a sheet of aluminium foil. Isn't that beautiful? So it has time and space to dry and harden. And now you can make parts where you spread it out thinner and other parts where you maybe keep it a little bit thicker. I love the effect of this. And there we go. So after about 1 hour, you will be able to start molding your mixture. This one is not quite there yet. However, this is how our results can look like. Here we have plastic that has taken about 1 day to harden. So you can see these are our thicker pieces that are really nice and flexible due to the glycerin that we use. But then we also have these little thinner parts that have this really cool peel-off effect. And so you see there's lots of cool ways that we can play with our results. Also, for an extra fun element, you could always decide to use, for example, a mold and make fun shapes out of your plant-based plastic. All right, so experimenting with this, we see that if we use our ingenuity, amazingly simple things that are all around us can lead to really big ideas that can change the world. So experimenting, exploring, being curious about what you do can spark your own ability to see the world in a whole new way and to create new solutions. So remember, anything is possible. You can reinvent and redesign your own world and the world of your community around you. That being said, we cannot wait to see you on the next episode of Science, You Had Me at Hello!
Oh, I love it. Thank you to the G4G team for sharing that experiment. Hopefully that has inspired all of you as well, and also generated a lot of questions. So we're bringing back our speakers for those last thoughts about what advice you could give to everyone else on the things that we talked about. So I'm going to turn this over. You're on my first screen. Rudayna, what advice would you have to everyone? What are the last things that you wanted to mention to the group that we have today?
Thank you. I love that experiment, by the way. I would say, maybe not surprisingly, but please use science for good. And there's often a lot of debate around science and the ethics of whether it is AI, whether it's what we're doing with genetics, whatever it may be. But please always keep your science for good hat on, because there are consequences to everything. And if we focus on that, I mean, just related to that, we've spent 13% of GDP goes towards military and defense, war-related stuff. And I would love to see that change. I'd like to see that come down to zero and having 13% of GDP go towards peace-building initiatives. So that's my little spiel.
All right. Thank you, Rudayna. Paige, what advice would you give to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to build off of some of the other things I've said, really to not be afraid to use your voice. I shared a little bit about how I had friends that were nervous that they weren't ready to apply for a project like Solar Impulse, but you never know when opportunities like that will come up. So don't be afraid, apply. And then a little bit building off of what Nancy was talking about, find a support system. Don't waste your time being around people who tell you that you can't. Be around people that say you can do it, and also be that person for others. Encourage your friends, support your friends, build that community of support.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Nancy?
I would say follow your heart. If you don't know what to choose, don't bother too much. Take the topic that really, really excites you. Because, yeah, throughout your career, you will change paths. And we see more and more in STEM that people are working interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. So don't think about, I should choose this because of that. It doesn't work that way. Choose what your heart tells you, and the rest will work out.
Love it. Okay, thank you all. Thank you especially for taking this time today to share your stories. And we've only heard, the beginning of it, right? So what I would also encourage is for everyone who's online today, I hope you feel a connection to these three fabulous people, and perhaps they wouldn't mind if you reached out on LinkedIn, for example. Perhaps they wouldn't mind to be that further inspiration should a question arise along the way. And do follow them, because as you'll see in our G4G social media, you'll see connections to each of them. So do follow, because it's great, as we were all talking about, is to support each other. This is brilliant. I want to thank you for your inspirational stories. And I also want to thank, of course, everyone who came in from so many different parts of the world. It's so lovely to see so many people that are part of G4G, and also new people as well. And I encourage, just like everyone has mentioned, use this opportunity to inspire those around you. We all need it. And we need to see what we can do in the world, and especially seeing as the three of you and what good you're doing around you. There's more of us that's needed for everything that we have around us. Thank you all for being part of Science You Had Me at Hello, and we look forward to seeing you at the next G4G event or the next broadcast. Thanks, everyone.